One. All right, welcome to another episode. Shez, I think we need to take some time and introduce ourselves now that we've inundated people with, I think, 2 hours of fully informed, not at all unobjective Formula One talk, right? So why don't I kick it to you, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
That's it. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So, well, it's morning here. Where am I? Australia. Where are you, Amar?
In Los Angeles,
Los
it's
Angeles.
4:30 in the afternoon.
Yikes. Yikes. Um, so we have now released 2 or 3 videos onto our YouTube channel, just as a taster of what you can expect from Amar and myself. Um, we are essentially just going to be talking about Formula One, a lot of it just from the hip, sometimes not with any agenda, sometimes with an agenda. But you can always rely on anything that we're going to say is going to be our own views, pretty honest. And some of it people are going to agree with, some of it people are not going to agree with. But now that everyone's had a taster, um, Amara, what say we let everyone know something about ourselves and why it is that a guy in Los Angeles and a guy that's currently in Australia are sitting together talking about Formula One.
I think
Um,
that's a really good idea. I mean, we are two tired dads, right? So we already know that part if you've been to our channel. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into this, Shez?
sure. So I'm originally from the UK. I live in London. And I work as a doctor. I'm a surgeon. I'm still in training, close to the end. And um, Formula One's probably the only sport I follow properly. And that's something I've been doing for a really long time. And if I think back to my earliest memories of Formula One, I think probably the first thing that I remember is sitting there with my dad in the living room, and it was a really bad memory actually because it was Imola, 1994. I remember having sort of little flashes of memory of races prior to that, and I remember sort of understanding a pattern that cars often did crash, but drivers often miraculously got out of their cars again. And this was the first time I'd ever seen anything where um, uh, somebody had hit a wall and they weren't then able to get out of the car again. And that's kind of become the first proper memory of Formula One that I've had. And it seems sort of if that was my first memory, why have I carried on watching it? But it evoked such a strong response in my dad. Um, I think he spent a lot of that afternoon and the rest of the week sort of this will age me a little bit, but he kept looking at CFAX. CFAX for those of you that aren't in the UK or born in the 80s, was like a little um, extra that was added to your TV set on top of the standard channels that you could click a little button. It would give you the news, the weather, um, um, really basic stuff. But it gave you some news about how Ayrton was doing and the aftermath, the fallout from that. And that's kind of where it all started. The rest of that season was a bit of a blur for me, and I think I really properly started to get into it again, sort of a couple of seasons down the line, when Michael moved to Ferrari, and really what that coincided with was actually that I was more into road cars at the time. I really like cars. I've always been ever since I was this small. I'm not that much bigger to be fair, but ever since I was that small, I've always liked road cars. And in the mid 90s, I started to read a lot more. And I had my subscription to Autocar magazine, and I'd really read it cover to cover religiously every week. And there was always a big section on Formula One and motorsport at the end. Especially remember Alan Henry's column, where you know, if you don't know who Alan Henry was a preeminent Formula One journalist in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And um, his knowledge of the sport and his connections in the sport were unparalleled. So the insight that he was giving was just absolute manna to somebody like me. So I'd be reading that. I'd be reading sort of what was happening with people that were coming through, what was happening at the races. And the story started to build up that, this guy, Michael Schumacher, that had won 2 championships at Benetton, was now at a Ferrari team that hadn't won anything for years and years and years. And there was a story at the end of the 90s there for me to like hang on to, of a guy fighting against the odds and building something in the background to take on ostensibly a better, not resource, but a more storied team, a team that had more contemporary success, that were more geared for that. And he was having to build something to compete against that, and that built up into the crescendo of 2000, where they won the title. And that kind of story of somebody who has ultimate ability but doesn't necessarily have the resources at their disposal, and fighting against that and building something to be able to become a winner, and what all of that takes, that's something that stuck with me, and I've and probably shaped what I like about Formula One now. So that's kind of where I'm from. There's probably a few more bits and pieces to add to that, especially how Formula One intertwines with my day-to-day job, because I think one of the things that I really enjoy about Formula One is drawing parallels with my job as a surgeon. Not just the actual act of being a surgeon, but also how the organization of Formula One has parallels with healthcare. I'm hoping that some of the people that listen to this will find that recognizable. Maybe you don't work in healthcare, and maybe you work in another industry, and you can see some parallels between your own work and the world of Formula One. Maybe that's why you enjoy Formula One as well. I'd love to hear from anyone that has that view. So yeah, those are the things that drew me into Formula One, the things that keep me interested now. How about you, Omar?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, that's great insight and great perspective. And there are things in there you've shared that I hadn't even known about it. We've been talking about this for at least a couple of years, if not more. Unlike you, Formula One has no connection with my job. So in the day, I am an educator with a doctorate. I lead a private university and focus on graduate programs. So what is the connection to Formula One? Nothing. And I absolutely love it because it allows me to go to a place where I can appreciate the sheer brilliance of man and machine, right? On the edge, and think about the places in life that you actually are there. There are very few places where that happens. Clearly, in your profession, Ches, that is the case. Of course, it is life and death in probably a different sense of the word. But I've just come to appreciate sports and athletes in general, right? And Formula One drivers, unlike some of the other racing sports, are at the peak of their athletic condition. Their bodies are unlike any other. They take a lot of pounding race to race, right? And that's not stuff that normal human beings do. So what brought me into the sport was simply that. Ironically, 94 stuck in my mind too, although I hadn't given it that much thought until you just brought it up. I too had watched that. I feel like that was probably a world event. I, by the way, grew up in the Middle East, so Formula One was broadcast there, although not always live and not always consistently. But for whatever reason, well, I mean, we know the reason, right? But that particular race was shown on replay, and I too remember being in shock. But at the time, I probably fully couldn't process everything, and I don't have proper recollection of all of the events. But I'm pretty sure I hadn't learned of his death until much, much later, and I want to say weeks. So it kind of was one of those things where I just saw it and it was like, okay, and sort of walked away from it. And then a few years later, I mean, when Schumacher got into the sport, I think that's when it really started to take off in terms of popularity and really being broadcast on the world stage. You would hear a lot more about his accomplishments. That really kind of drew me in. I think the years that I remember the most, sort of being intrigued, is when him and Mika went back and forth and competed as much as they did. that's when I really started to enjoy it and really get a taste of it. And then, of course, a few years later, had the opportunity to go back and sort of view some of the previous races and previous seasons, which have been great. But that really got me into it. And then, of course, if you haven't guessed by my hat here, I am a big Flying Finn fan. The Iceman cometh. I still have hope that he will someday be back. Although I'm not quite sure what he would be doing out there other than eating an ice cream, which for me is just fine, right? But I started following Kimmy, and I think that's when my intensity of following the sport and sort of going back and learning more about that reached new heights. Of course, 2003 and 2005 were equally thrilling and heartbreaking seasons. I feel like he should have had both of those. So that's my bias up front. I should admit that in this day and age, I am just, sort of a Ferrari fan that is lost. So if you'll probably see that in my opinions, it's slightly unhinged at times too, in terms of my fandom there. I really want to see the Italian team be back up to where they should be because, the sport is just better when they are, in my opinion. But that's sort of what got me into this. And, one of my most favorite memories, and this is more recently, is in the United States. Not, I can't remember how many years ago. Formula One used to be broadcast on what's called Speed TV. And Bob Warshaw used to call the races along with David Hobbs and Steve Matchett. And I really love that. The whole Sky Sports thing is a relatively new thing for me, but I still remember Bob Warshaw's epic, commentary. I had the good fortune to meet him at a restaurant in Atlanta where he lives. And it was just amazing. It was mind blowing, and that really sort of sealed the deal for me. So for as long as I can remember, I've loved the sport. I cannot remember everything, but I think through the course of our conversation, I'll probably remember more things. But yeah, I've been there, and the Senna documentary really kind of got me back into it. That's way before DTS, right? And that was quite heartbreaking, and I probably a little bit more dramatic than it needed to be. But yeah, that's why we're here. And lo and behold, Chaz, we met a couple years ago to be at the US Grand Prix in my most favorite circuit in the United States, in Austin, Texas, and we have not stopped talking about it since then. So yeah, here we are.
Yeah, I mean it's been a while. It's been a while coming. Just for full disclosure, me and Omar are mildly related, and
Mildly.
that's how we've ended up talking to each other. But it's rare these days well, it's not rare these days because there's a lot of Formula One fans around. But when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of Formula One fans around. I didn't really have anybody to talk Formula One with. That seems to have changed recently. I think the massive surge in interest that's happened with Drive to Survive, with the 2021 season, with everyone having a bit more time at home. All of those things have meant that the sport that I really enjoy, that I had to, when I was a kid, everyone just talked about football. And that's soccer to you, Omar.
Right, exactly.
But for me, even then, football was like a secondary interest. So I had to sort of sit there and read my magazines and imagine a conversation with somebody else. And every now and again, somebody would fall into my orbit that talked about that liked Formula One, that knew about Formula One. And I remember having conversations about who was better, like Michael Schumacher or Jacques Villeneuve for most of the late 90s, with a few people at school, but it was few and far between. And I didn't, outside of a few close friends that really enjoyed the sport as well, I didn't really have anyone to really get into sort of the nitty gritty with. That seems to have changed a lot. But Amara, it's been really nice finding somebody like you, who also enjoys sort of picking things apart and analyzing things and reading around, and being able to have a conversation about stuff that isn't maybe on the printed page, but where you've had to put your own insight into it and try and work things out for yourself. Perhaps even come up with an opinion that might not be so popular. These are all things that I enjoy doing that I didn't get a chance to do when I was younger, and I'm now getting to play that out as a middle-aged man.
I couldn't agree with you more. I lived in Indianapolis from 2003 to roughly 2009, and back then, Formula One came to the U.S. and to Indy, and I didn't have a whole lot of friends, so I remember working the concession stands in Indianapolis back in my college days, right, where tickets were more affordable, but I couldn't really afford them, so I decided to go work the Grand Prix. And the neat thing about that experience was that, when the race started, no one would come to buy any food or beverages. So I would just kind of get to go out and be in some of the general admission areas and go admire the race. And then when it was about to conclude, I'd come back and do my job. So that was one of my most satisfying experiences. I got to watch something that I dearly, dearly loved and got paid for it too, except for that year when, of course, only 6 cars raced, right? So that was a bit of a bummer. But outside of that, yeah, I'd really love to do that. But just like you, I have not had a whole lot of people that are really interested in talking about this. And so what I hope the people that watch this will get out of it is, of course, our heart and our passion when it comes to it, but then, just our ability to sort of look at it from a fan's perspective, throw in some good analysis, but also some good irrational fanatic behavior, right? That I'm sure those of you that are cheering for a team other than Red Bull maybe these days are probably feeling it in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, this seems like a great space to be able to do this and share it with others.
Yeah. So hopefully over the course of the next however long we do this for, people will have an interest in sort of some of the things that we're talking about. As I said, that often we won't have a very fixed agenda. A lot of what we're talking about just flows from sort of where we started, and we just see where a particular conversation goes. It doesn't have to go anywhere particularly. So it's often difficult for both of us to clip these at the end because we have no idea what we were actually clipping in the first place. But it should be a fairly interesting wander down the road of F1.
Shez, I like to think of this as a bit of a lazy river, right? We don't know what direction we'll go in. It won't always be epically produced. By the way, those of you that are out there that watch this and do some kind of editing, you're welcome to join the team. We have day jobs that really take up our time, so we're doing this mainly as our passion and really as a chance for us to. For last year it was all about venting, so. Hopefully this year will be a little bit better, but that's kind of where we're doing it. But hey, that's why we called ourselves the Tired Pod. Like, we are tired, right? So if this is going to be fun. It's going to be a fun ride, and it's going to be enjoyable as long as you can deal with our messiness. We're messy by design, Shaz.
You think it's by design? Yeah,
It
maybe.
is by design. It's not by choice, certainly, is it?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not trying to be messy, but it seems to be coming out that way. Yeah,
I am trying to set the bar as low as you can. And that's
nice.
mainly for me, not for you. That's for me. The bar is very low, and then we'll beat it. But we'll get better with this as time passes, I'm sure.
Here you go, everyone.
Or not.
This is this is YouTubers as you go. So just with that out of the way, is there anything you wanted to talk about this week? There's definitely some stuff that's happened in the news.
I have
something US based.
Oh my goodness. We Americans have a way of doing about things. Well, look, we're having this conversation a day after the Dallas Cowboys lost in the playoffs. They were effectively eliminated in the first game of the playoffs. And if you don't know anything about the Cowboys, you should know that they're popularly known as America's team. They're probably the Ferrari equivalent of NFL's team in America, right? So if you understand how Ferrari works, it's not that different from how the Cowboys work. That said, we're not talking about Ferrari, right? We're talking about what happened at Haas. I guess a bit surprising and not all that surprising, right? I think I've been trying to process what happened. I think the shock of it happening at this point in time is pretty interesting and has led to a lot of speculation, all of which I don't happen to know, but it does seem like a very interesting thing. I'd like to take one angle to this, right? There's probably 15 different ways to sort of think about this, but last week we were talking about the popularity of F1, and I think that this could either be a really, really bad thing, or maybe a really, really good thing, depending on what Gunther decides to do, right? Losing him, as it stands, at least as of this recording, is not a good thing for the sport in general. I don't know how good it would have been for Haas. It doesn't seem like they were on a trajectory that included resources and investments and even direction in trying to improve the car and improve, I guess, their team in general. But I think having him around made it interesting. I loved listening to him whenever he would be with the Sky F1 team, breaking down practices, breaking down things that are happening, within Haas, but also just happening on that weekend. If there's a particular, event or unforeseen circumstance that came up, and just being able to see that. His candor, his ability to connect with the audience is well documented. I think he had a book come out, and also the TV show that he's, I believe, an executive producer on. So I don't think he's featuring in it directly, but I would imagine that would be very exciting, very entertaining. So just from the entertainment perspective value, I think this is a big loss as of today. However, I mean, I can see this being a great win, and we should talk more about that. But before we do that, what do you think?
I mean, I think, yeah, I think what you said is really true. I think you can kind of divide this whole thing up into what it means for Formula One in terms of its popularity and how it's portrayed, and then how it affects Haas and what it says about Haas. I think that's kind of where I came to it from. I think for me, the whole Gunther as a personality, as somebody that swears a lot and is very outspoken, was one thing, and it's interesting to watch. But that's not really, my focus, or at least my interest, is more in performance, and the fact that his contract wasn't renewed leads me to think about sort of why that happened. And ostensibly, you've got two different views that are coming. One is Gene Haas, who gave an interview to Formula1.com almost, a couple of days after the announcement, and then Gunther Steiner himself, who's then spoken at the Autosport conference, I think, a few days ago. And it's really interesting to hear what both of them have said, because Gene Haas has kind of said, look, I wasn't happy with the performance of the team. We have one of the best engines in Formula One. We have really great parts. We've got a great partner in Dallara, who are building the cars. We should be doing better with the resources that we have. And on the other side of it, you've got Gunther Steiner saying, well, the model that we use at the moment is an outdated model. It was perfect for 2016 when there were teams that were just falling off the back of the grid. This is the time at which Marussia, Caterham, and Hispania were just falling off the back of the grid. USF1 hadn't even made it onto the grid. So the expenditure to be successful was massive. And if you weren't successful, you weren't getting prize money. If you weren't getting prize money, you didn't have any budget. So to come into Formula One at the time that they did with the model that they had was sensible. Whether that's actually... So what Gunther is saying now is that I don't think that model works so much anymore. It's not relevant in a setting of a budget cap era where everybody is so much more secure that they're able to bring in funding. So we need more funding to be able to compete. And the counterpoint to that again is that Gene Haas is saying, I don't want to have to spend more money. I think we've got enough money. We've got a model. We're just not being efficient. I guess we're going to find out over the course of the next year or two which one of those two is right. My hunch on this, my sort of internal feeling, is that Gunther's probably correct, that Gene Haas has felt like somebody that's kind of wanted to just watch his Formula One team from afar and wanted to just reap the benefits of having a Formula One team in the pre-budget cap era, that's just exposure and how it makes his automation and machining company look. And I think he's been able to get that. But you know, when Haas really needed funding, and it's not like he's short of cash, it's not that he couldn't provide that funding with his name above the door. He wasn't willing to do that, and that's why you ended up with situations where Haas were partnered up with Rich Energy and then Uralkali, and even MoneyGram is a partner that Gunther Steiner has been able to acquire, and has meant that Gene Haas hasn't had to put that cash in. But if you look at other teams now up and down the grid, you look at Aston Martin, massive investment in infrastructure. Williams, they've now got an investment company that are willing to put the money in, that are willing to get the team up to the operational budget cap, and are wanting to put more money in for infrastructure. You know, the FIA have made $20 million available extra for infrastructure. Gene Haas doesn't want to spend that money. And you kind of have to go, okay, yes, there is some value in being efficient and doing a good job with a small amount of money. But what I would say is that the ideal is to be efficient, but also have a big budget. And I think those two things go hand in hand. With better infrastructure and better tools, you can make better decisions that make your processes much more streamlined and efficient. So it's not that you spend less money and therefore you are more efficient. You have to be better with your budget. It's that the bigger budget allows you to be more efficient and allows you to have the tools, the hardware, to make better decisions, so that further decisions down the line are the correct ones. Yeah. And they're not leading you down the wrong road because your initial tools that you haven't spent money on don't provide you with the correct answers. So I think we're going to see that Haas are just going to fall off the back of the grid, and they're going to get further and further off the back of the grid while other teams ramp up their efforts. And whether or not Gene Haas is happy with that, part of me thinks that he is. Part of me just thinks that he's happy to just have the return in investment. I said somewhere else that Forbes have valued Haas at $780 million, right? Gene Haas doesn't want to have more investors because they want a return on their investment. Well, obviously they want a return on their investment, but it's implicit upon you to create the conditions, spend that money properly to invest and get better performance. But I don't think that he necessarily thinks that that's important. I don't know what you think about that, because that's how I take it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I follow a lot of American sports, right? And I see in basketball, for example, in the NBA and even the NFL, there are owners that, you know, these are capped sports, right, in terms of salary cap. So this is probably slightly an apples to oranges comparison, but not entirely, I think, in terms of the philosophy and the view of the owner. And so in reality, there are teams in the NBA, there are 32 teams. And there are perpetually 4 or 5 teams that have ownership that does not really want to spend. And I think that mentality sort of aligns with what you just said about Gene Haas. And it does seem, at least on the surface, and in some of the actions, that he isn't interested in investing more. I do think you bring up a good question of, you know, the philosophy of this, right? Is it the money that leads to being more efficient, or is it the efficiency that leads to better utilization of the funds you already have? And I wonder, I mean, it does seem in that, I guess this parting was on the cards, right? Because you have 2 different perspectives and ultimately the owner gets to win out. I wonder though, like, I mean, Gunther's been there for 10 years too. There does come a point in time where maybe the person to lead you into the future maybe does need to have a different mindset, given the new format of how things work, right, with teams and how they manage their budgets. I did have that thought in mind, and that leads me to wonder if, you know, the current leadership at Haas might just be sort of a transitional sort of leadership, and that we might not be done seeing another move, because to have a technical person in charge at this point in time does seem like a slightly bit more counterintuitive, given what James has done at Williams, right? I mean, you do need someone that has the ability to understand more than just technical direction. And Lord knows I know what that was like at Ferrari not too long ago, right? 2 years ago, we were dealing with someone that was really great with design and engineering, but not really with others. So there's a part of me that feels that if Gene Haas does decide not to sell, which I think he's said that at this point, but I feel like that's what everyone says, even if they are going to sell, right? I mean, and kind of the Christian Horner way of saying there are no imminent plans of that happening right now, right? And those plans can change, right? I get the feeling that there's a sale coming up for Haas, right? Just to your point, I mean, the team is valued just under $1 billion. If he indeed is not willing to spend, he might be ready to kind of take off. But I don't know enough about his own sort of wanting to be in the sport or not kind of thing. It has felt a bit shaky at times, and even with the rich energy kind of thing. So it is interesting. I think I wouldn't be surprised if the team got sold. In fact, there's a part of me that would love to kind of have it be sold to Andretti and then just sort of move forward. It seems like a great way to make that happen. I do have to wonder if on some level, if Formula One is trying to maybe behind the scenes making it happen. Right? So this is
Yeah.
completely speculative, slightly reckless speculation here, but it is it. I have seen this happen in other sports here in the US, so I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
I think that's interesting because I think I agree with you that it's not in Formula One's interest to have a team like Haas sitting at the back of the grid, not putting in any investment, not really interested necessarily in being competitive because they know that their place on the grid is secure. So they can just sit around at the back and just rake in the cash. Sorry, go on. Yep, sorry about the brief intermission. So I don't think it's in Formula One's interest to have a team at the back of the grid that's just raking in that has no interest in being particularly competitive and just want to rake in money. And kind of in the old days, I think Bernie would have got in there and kind of said to Gene Haas, if you want to be on the grid, put some more money in. If you don't want to be here, sell up. Here's Andretti. They want to buy in. They have a structure. They want to win. If you don't want to be here, sell to them. And he would have made that happen. I don't know if there is anybody at Liberty that is going to do that, is going to have that role, that's going to be able to sort of get in behind closed doors and do the backroom deals that either convince Gene Haas that he needs to put more money into the team, be a bit more involved. He says he's going to be more involved, or that's going to say, look, mate, this isn't for you. You've had a good run out of it, but I think it's now time to sell up to somebody that's more interested. But I don't think the financial side of it necessarily stacks up. I know there was a article and a podcast in the race where it was sort of posited that Haas would get a huge amount of money from selling up his team. I agree. As a lump sum, he'd make a huge amount of money. But at the moment, he gets exposure. So his company is linked to a Formula One team, and all of the partners that also entails. And also for doing pretty much nothing, even finishing 10th in the constructors every single season, he still rakes in prize money. So he has to put in very little money to get prize money back. And it's a sort of self-fulfilling virtuous cycle for him, even if he doesn't want to be particularly competitive. So I can't see a definite financial reason for selling up. And I think there needs to be another incentive for him to say, all right, I'm out, I'll sell up.
Listen, the incentive always is there's always a right price, right? So I think you're right. If there's someone behind the scenes that can make it happen, they certainly could be. Yeah, it's a little bit hard to know with the way Liberty goes about things, and I think they prefer to generally do things behind the scenes a lot. So I think that would be interesting. I also wonder what value does Haas have in terms of its popularity on the grid, right? I mean, a lot of it was driven by Gunther, but they've generally not been a team that has excited folks. They've had a few things here and there. I mean, they kind of got lucky with the pole a couple of years ago, right? In Brazil, but there's not been anything where you've been able to say week in and week out there's been anything interesting around the team, even though performance has been good in some of the races last year too. Like, I mean, they were in the mix, at least in qualifying, right? And a couple of races where they had, where they looked like they were in the right position to get some points, but it didn't quite work out. So I do wonder, right, on the one hand, the element of, well, Gunther was the guy that got them to this point, but is there another person to take them to the next level too? I think there might be a good argument for that. Who that person is, I don't know. Maybe it is Gene Haas himself. Maybe he is. Maybe if he is wanting to be more involved, then he can be the de facto leader, and then leave the technical stuff to AO, and then kind of move from there, right? That might be the formula. I also think that might be a money saving formula too, right? I mean, in the end, if he doesn't have to have Gunther there, then it is what it is. So
I mean,
yeah,
I thought having the Maranello Technical Center was actually was going to be a step forward, especially the fact that they were now embedding Formula One engineers. Simone Aresta was there, who's now also
no,
left Haas. And I mean, Simone Aresta has been a sort of senior technical engineer at Ferrari for years. He was head of engines there. He also was technical director there for a short period of time as well. So he's not somebody that doesn't know what he's doing. So I thought that was going to be something that was going to, move Haas forward a little bit. But again, when you're using kind of secondhand data, that's kind of what it felt like to me. Like they were just they had a lot of technical data and a lot of parts from Ferrari, and a lot of their philosophy was just following on from what Ferrari were doing. So it was always secondhand stuff. So you were always going to be behind the curve. It never seemed like a model that was going to move them forward in the same way that AlphaTauri are never going to be at the same level as Red Bull, although Red Bull are now trying to bring them up to their level a bit more. It was never going to be a model that was going to push them up to the front of a grid. And ostensibly, they're an independent team. That should be what they're aiming to do. And to your point about, how interesting they are, this is absolutely what I felt when Andretti are sitting there. They've turned up with a GM contract, with GM saying that they want to be an engine supplier from 2026 onwards, that they have that racing name behind them, that they say that they have the facilities and they have the infrastructure and the funding to do this. What I didn't understand was when that conversation was happening, where was Formula One kind of saying that, what is the value that certain teams on the grid bring? Now, look, I fully understand that you have to be able to reward the teams that stuck with Formula One when Formula One was really struggling, especially during COVID, and Haas are one of those teams. But now that the guy that really did that is gone, what value does Haas really bring to the grid anymore? I don't know.
No, I
I don't know.
completely agree with you. I do agree with, and this is why, I mean, we haven't heard anything about the 11th team yet, right? I mean, we haven't quite, we had heard things and then we have not heard. And there is a part of me that believes that maybe those conversations are happening behind the scenes now. It
Absolutely.
might be a
Yeah,
price,
absolutely.
right? Or maybe if Gene Haas is clearly interested in just keeping his name in some way, that can be worked out in a way that doesn't then have to be a 11 team. I mean, he stands dilution challenges too, right? If there's an 11 team, right? Or there might be a better deal for him where he does not have to be directly involved in the sport. Maybe find a way to have some sort of a sponsorship agreement where his name remains in the mix. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a no-brainer for Formula One. Again, thinking back to the popularity issue, right? To have Andretti's name come in here at this point in time, coming on the back of maybe two lackluster seasons, relatively speaking, right after 21. I couldn't think of a better way to kind of get some interest going back in the sport again. You have that rejuvenation, if you will. It does seem right. I mean, we haven't heard anything about Andretti, and on the other hand, that this has come up too. So the timing might be quite the factor in all of these things.
But I mean, so I read there's a good article by Ben Anderson again in the race who sort of talked about how when Haas were doing well, often it was because other teams weren't doing as well as they should have been, right? And now we're getting to a point where everyone's a lot more stable. Even Williams are now, you know, they've got a forward-thinking team principal. They've got an investment company that are happy to follow that lead, and that want to put money in, that want to get Williams to shoot their way back up the grid. McLaren have got a whole new infrastructure. They've got solid funding. They've got the basis of really good infrastructure, a brand new wind tunnel, a brand new driver and loop simulator, hiring from the top teams in Formula One, Ferrari and Red Bull. They're on the up, and they've demonstrated that. Aston Martin, the same. You know, these are teams with vision that were in dire straits at the time that Haas was doing well, because Haas didn't have to do a lot to do well at that point, because they were able to just work at a low budget and still produce some results. But that isn't the reality of Formula One anymore. And to think that that is how you're going to maintain your competitiveness, I think is a fallacy. And Gene Haas might be embarrassed by the fact that he's finished 10th this season and 10th last season. I think if things keep going the way they are at the moment, with the way that he wants to run the team and the way he wants to fund it, I think it will just they may have better performance. They may sort of gradually get closer to the mean, but I don't think that they're ever going to start leapfrogging the teams in front of them that have better vision and better potential.
Yeah, I think that this is a bad time to make changes, and this is a bad time to be bad, right? I think to your point, I mean, there are no weak spots across the grid, right? I mean, the grid is bunched up as it can be, and I think that you know, this is going to be epic one way or another. Either we're going to find out that Gunther wasn't really as good as we all thought he would be, or they're going to start to fall off. And I'd like to believe the latter as well. I think that this is going to be a big blow for Haas, and I think we're in for at least a couple of rough years for them. Relative to the perform, I mean, they might end up still being last next year, but I think the difference in where they're at to the ninth team might be pretty significant if things stay, you know, stay the same. I mean, this season we come in with a lot of promise of that convergence, right, to the Red Bull idea, the Red Bull concept, and I don't quite know what Haas will do. They clearly don't have the resources to do what Ferrari can, as an example, but I don't even know if they can, and if AlphaTauri are benefiting from Red Bull in some way, shape, or form. That is really, really bad news. There's really nowhere for them to go.
And I think the other thing with Haas is that, you know, unlike the other teams on the grid, Haas, or the other teams in the grid that maybe didn't have the same infrastructure, Haas doesn't have any history. You know, like when we're talking about value, people want to see Williams stay on the grid. They want to see that name, right? They want to see McLaren stay on the grid because they've got that history. Haas don't even have that to fall back on. Like if the Haas name fell off the grid,
No one would notice. No one
in
would
20
notice.
exactly in 20, 30 years time, who's gonna know?
Better yet, if the Andretti name came instead of it, then it would be even yeah. So I think you're 100% right. Can we shift gears a little bit to talk
Sure.
about the guy at the center of all of this? Like where do we think he's going to end up? Like I'm fascinated by that question, right? Like I think he would be great in the commentary booth, like somewhere, somehow. I don't know what that looks like, but for him to be involved in some way, I think if he's going to take a sabbatical this year of sorts and not go join another team, which seems unlikely, not impossible though. I would love to see him be involved in some way, shape, or form in the media.
What would you see him doing?
I love the idea of having a third guy in the commentary. I mean, we've talked about this, you know, in the past as well. I think having a team principal who would be willing to speak his mind, and I'm making the big assumption, big leap here, that he will in fact be willing to be more candid than he has been as a team principal would be really, really lovely to really be able to break down things. Especially with his sense of, you know, delivery, his simplicity in making things you know, as easy for most people to understand as possible. I think that would be of great value to Sky, which I think is the lead broadcaster for most of the world, at least here in the States. So
Yeah, I know that you don't love Sky F1,
eh,
but I think actually I think in the past few seasons, at least, some of the hires they've had have been pretty useful. I think Bernie Collins is an absolute breath of fresh
Absolutely.
air.
Yep.
And having people like her come along and really explain things in a simple manner from the point of view of somebody that's actually competed in the sport, I think is brilliant. It's absolutely what Formula One needs. Having somebody like Gunther in there from a team principal point of view, I think so Gunther's an interesting example, right? Because he currently does a lot of the commercial side of things at Haas. That's kind of what he was doing, but he came up on an engineering background. He partly finished with an engineering degree. He started off in rallying. He was a race engineer there, and he was the sort of technical team principal at Jaguar when Niki Lauda sort of turned up, um, and even at Red Bull, that's the kind of role that he fulfilled in the early part of their history. So he has a technical background, and he's fairly unique, I think, in the history of team principals, in that, well, in the recent history at least, because somebody like Eddie Jordan did all of the commercial side of things, right? He was very much, I'm going to go out, get the money, I'm going to bring in the sponsors. And if you ever listen to him on his podcast with David Coulthard, a lot of his stories about how he walked into a boardroom of a particular investor and got them to give Jordan their money. But he was very good at just leaving the technical side of things, and even the driver side of things to people that knew better. Gary Anderson was the guy that designed the Jordan 191, and the success of that team over the course of the 90s was down to the technical team being left to be able to do what they wanted to do. Gunther seems to sort of straddle both of those a little bit. I'm not sure somebody that has a really commercial outlook is somebody that you'd want in the commentary booth necessarily. I think that's somebody that would be useful in a sort of talking about Formula One from a political point of view. And I think that's where Gunther would be super, super good, because he would be able to straddle the divide between some of the politics behind the technical decisions that are being made, not necessarily what the implications of a technical decision are. That's where somebody like James Allison or Adrian Newey coming in and talking about what the implications of something of an aerodynamic change are. But why has something happened? Why has a particular technical change come in? Is there a political reason for that? Gunther would be great at explaining that.
Absolutely.
But also coming in from a commercial point of view, having had to bring in sponsors, having had to make those presentations, understanding what the commercial point of view that Liberty are trying to portray is, and the kind of why is a Vegas race important? Gunther would be really good at explaining that from a Sky F1 point of view. I don't necessarily think that him calling strategy and performance in a race are what he'd be good at.
I wouldn't want to have him as part of the full-time sort of commentary booth, right? But much like Bernie Collins comes in and explains
Yeah.
why certain things happen, I think he would be great. I think, to your point, another great place for him to be is particularly in the content in and around races, right? We still have a dearth of understanding when it comes to like how to build up to races. What does that look like? And then the business aspects of it too. So I could see a show or a podcast or something like that around just explaining the inner workings of Formula One as a whole, because Gunther has been in many ways, probably a top 5 ambassador for the sport the last few years. So I think there would be a great lane there to, again, simplify the sport, make it a little bit more interesting and palatable to folks that are new to the sport as well. I could see that being a great thing. Go ahead.
Do you think he could fall back into a working role within a team?
Of course, I've thought about that. Guess where he would
What
fit in really nicely.
Andretti?
Well, if that happens, then yeah, I mean that'd be it. But we're not. Yes, I think it would be great to go back to Ferrari. I mean,
Yeah, I knew you were
what
going
a
to say
great
that.
combination, him and Vasseur, like that. That would be amazing. I mean, I think to your point, I mean, because he has straddled this line of being, I almost would say a little bit more commercial side than sort of the inner workings of it. I don't know if there's a role there. Maybe there is. I don't know. I don't quite know. I've never quite thought of him as sort of the technical genius. I mean, it's probably the lane he sort of left, right, in taking this role on. So
Yeah, I agree.
but maybe I don't know. I mean, Ferrari have never really been tested on other aspects, right? It's been at least a year and a half since, some of the sort of the strategizing and really not even strategizing, the sort of having the gumption and sort of guts to make calls sort of thing happen. They've never been put in that situation. So who knows? I could see him being a good sort of a second guy to Fred there, and they probably have a lot of similarities, so I don't think that would work out there, man. And I don't quite know where else he would fit in. McLaren seems to have a pretty good team at
Yeah.
the top, and Aston Martin also seems like they've kind of got it going. So who knows?
Amar, I think the one team on the grid that is kind of lost their direction a little bit in
Alpine,
terms of, yeah, Alpine.
yeah,
Alpine have got the problem with Alpine is that they seem to have a very short-term view of what is happening, and there's success hasn't happened immediately, so therefore we're gonna sack everybody and start again, and that cycle just keeps happening again and again and again. Maybe somebody like Gunther would be good to bring a bit of stability,
could be.
and the management that they have at the moment seems to be very, very interim. They've promoted from within, but they've got in somebody. I keep forgetting his name. It will come to me. But who they've got in is somebody that buys in, that seems to have just bought into the management viewpoint of things, but hasn't really understood or or is happy to just toe that line because it puts them in a position where they can make decisions, but actually the decisions aren't being made by the team on the ground. And that's what Gunther, I think, would be able to bring some kind of separation between upper management and the
Yeah.
actual running of the team. And if he can separate those two things out,
Yep.
um, one of the things that I worry about Gunther, though, is that he is his effect on the young on the drivers, and on the technical team, and whether or not, yes, he might be able to bring a bit of separation between the team and the upper management, but would he be able to separate himself out from the day-to-day running of the technical side of the team? Because that's probably what he needs to be able to straddle. That's what Alpine need. They need someone that can separate upper management from the day-to-day running of the team, and make sure that side of it, the running of the team day to day, is isolated and protected from the machinations of upper management. Is Gunther the guy to do that? Perhaps,
Perhaps.
perhaps he's had at least some
The
experience of having a remote owner and running the Formula One team. Maybe that's where he fits in.
the
Um,
Alpine situation is such a hybrid between Ferrari and Haas, right? Like you can kind of see the parallels there. I don't know. Yeah, I do. You do have to wonder if that's where his heart lies too, right? Like I mean, this is a very consuming job, right? To be a team principal. And it does seem like he's got talents that go way beyond that. So again, I think of the commentary team or being involved in media some way, because that would be a relatively easy job to do, with having being able to spend a lot more time back home, which is something he had
yeah,
alluded to in Drive to
yeah,
Survive as well, which
yeah,
I'm sure is the case for all of them, right? Like that,
yeah. I agree
it
with
has
that.
to be all consuming. And yeah, I think the Alpine situation is probably the best for both sides. But it's quite hard to figure out if that's something what he really wants to do. I agree with your point of, I don't know if he would be able to kind of do what needs to be done, right? Is to sort of keep the two sides where they need to be and keep
Mm.
management out of day to day, and probably vice versa too. But it might be the type of situation that might be great for Alpine too, right? I mean, they're sort of they're kind of in no man's land in some ways, it feels like, but they have secured great investors,
Yeah,
popular American
yeah,
celebrities. Going to
yeah.
Steiner being in there, I mean, that could be the thing, and that there's a bit of a lane there for popularity. I mean, that we don't, even though we have
Oh,
Haas as an American team, I'm not, it's not one we actually kind of think of first, right? If you asked the typical viewer here in the United States, they wouldn't put Haas in their top three when it comes to thinking about teams. And that's, I mean, that's the indictment. I mean, you just alluded to it earlier, right? Like if Haas went away from the face of Formula One, no one would remember, much like only some of us remember Marussia and HRT and, even Force India for that.
All of that is true, but I'm very Pepsi Max about this, right? Image is nothing, performance is everything.
Hey, listen.
And like and I can understand the commercial value of having somebody like Gunther Steiner at Alpine. It was Bruno Famin, by the way. I can't believe I forgot his name, but that's who it is at Alpine.
We didn't make an impression on you. We know that.
Oops. Sorry, Bruno.
Let this be the episode where we call Bruno out. Like, no.
I'm really sorry. But one of the things that I've heard about Gunther, and you can kind of see it in the way that he responds to his own drivers, the way that he brings them into his office and gives them a good telling off in the classic Ron Dennis manner, is that maybe he doesn't have the ability to separate himself out from the daily running of the team. Like he has to be too involved, and that is kind of what somebody that runs from a commercial point of view shouldn't be doing. It's hopefully what Fred Vasseur is doing at Ferrari right now is separating out the Ferrari family from the day-to-day running of the team, because that's what was killing Ferrari, and it's what's going to kill Alpine right now.
I'm going to defend Gunther for a second too. I think your point is right about separation, but let's keep in mind that he literally built that team, right? So you can see why he would be involved, right? Like, but a change of scenery, just like I was arguing for Haas, right? Could be just the same and good for Gunther too, right? Going to a team that is, I mean, relatively well established. I mean, well established is fair, right? And he may not have to be the jack of all trades as he's had to be at Haas for so long.
Yeah, that's great.
So that might be a different thing too. So he might operate differently in a different environment too.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Well, there you go. You heard it here first. Gunther Steiner to Alpine.
And there you go. That seems like a great time for us to end this episode, right? Like we've done a lot of talking here. So let's do this. Let's end here. What do you say?
Yeah, sound good. But classic YouTube style, please like and subscribe. And if you have any comments, anything that you'd like us to talk about, add it in the comments below.
We love your topics. Bring them in. Thanks for watching.